Ethiopia, the mystery giant and the origin of mankind. Nelson Mandela once profoundly stated, "Ethiopia always has a special place in my imagination, and the prospect of visiting Ethiopia attracted me more strongly than a trip to France, England, and America combined. I felt I would be visiting my own genesis, unearthing the roots of what made me an African." These words from one of history's most revered leaders capture the mystical essence that Ethiopia holds, not just for Africans, but for human civilization itself. This ancient land, nestled in the eastern part of Africa, between the equator and the Tropic of Cancer, in a region known as the Horn of Africa, holds secrets that challenge our understanding of human history and spirituality. This remarkable nation stands as a testament to human resilience and cultural continuity. Ethiopia is the sole African country to possess an alphabet more than 2,000 years old, and the only nation on the continent to have maintained independence in the face of European colonizers. When European powers carved up Africa in the 19th century, Ethiopia stood defiant, defeating Italian forces at the Battle of Adwa in 1896, a victory that reverberated throughout colonized peoples worldwide and became a symbol of African resistance and dignity. The story of Ethiopia begins with some of the earliest known civilizations in Africa. Archaeological discoveries have revealed that this land was home to some of humanity's first ancestors. The discovery of Lucy, Australopithecus afarensis, in 1974 in Ethiopia's Afar region, pushed human origins back 3.2 million years, making Ethiopia quite literally the cradle of humanity. This discovery transformed our understanding of human evolution and placed Ethiopia at the center of our collective origin story. Among the most fascinating chapters in Ethiopia's history is the rise of the kingdom of Aksum, which emerged around the 1st century AD. Aksum was not merely another ancient kingdom. It was a powerful and influential empire that controlled much of the Horn of Africa and established trade networks extending as far as Rome, Persia, and India. Roman historian Pliny described Aksum as one of the most important empires in the world, yet today, many remain unaware of its significance and achievements. The Aksumite civilization demonstrated remarkable technological and architectural prowess. The famous obelisks of Aksum stand as testament to their engineering capabilities. Massive monolithic structures carved from single pieces of granite, some reaching heights of over 33 meters, 108 feet. These monuments, adorned with intricate carvings and false doors, served as grave markers for royal tombs. The largest of these structures weighs approximately 520 tons, a feat of engineering that would challenge even modern construction techniques. What makes these achievements even more remarkable is that they were accomplished without the wheel or iron tools, using methods that continue to puzzle scholars today. In the 4th century AD, Aksum made a decision that would forever alter its trajectory: the adoption of Christianity as the state religion under King Ezana. This made Ethiopia one of the first countries in the world to officially embrace Christianity, even before many European nations. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church developed in relative isolation from Western Christianity, allowing it to maintain unique traditions, practices, and sacred texts that would eventually be suppressed or forgotten elsewhere in the Christian world. This isolation was not accidental. As Islamic forces expanded across North Africa and the Middle East in the 7th century, Ethiopia found itself increasingly cut off from other Christian centers. While this isolation presented challenges, it also became a blessing in disguise, allowing Ethiopia to preserve ancient Christian traditions and texts that would be altered or lost in other regions. The mountainous terrain of the Ethiopian highlands created natural fortresses where monks and scholars could safeguard sacred knowledge through centuries of turbulence. The Zagwe dynasty, which ruled Ethiopia from approximately the 10th to the 13th century, furthered this tradition of preservation and cultural achievement. During this period, Ethiopia produced some of its most impressive architectural wonders, the rock-hewn churches of Lalibela. Carved entirely from solid rock, these 11 magnificent churches were not built from the ground up, but rather excavated downward, chiseled out of the living stone. King Lalibela, for whom the site is named, is said to have been inspired by a vision to create a new Jerusalem in Ethiopia, after Muslim conquests made pilgrimages to the Holy Land impossible for Ethiopian Christians. These extraordinary churches remain active places of worship today, with services that have continued uninterrupted for nearly a millennium. The rituals performed within these ancient sanctuaries use the same language, songs, and sacred texts that have been preserved since the early days of Christianity, including scriptures that many Western Christians have never encountered. As we journey deeper into Ethiopia's history, we begin to uncover secrets that challenge conventional understanding of biblical history and the development of monotheistic religions. The ancient kingdom that flourished in these highlands preserved not only architectural wonders and engineering marvels, but also sacred texts and traditions that offer alternative perspectives on familiar religious narratives, perspectives that certain authorities throughout history have sought to suppress or destroy. The mystery of Ethiopia extends beyond its monuments and into the realm of sacred knowledge. Within its borders lies a controversial and little-known story that has captivated scholars and historians for centuries. The story of the Ethiopian Bible, a sacred text that has been banned and suppressed by various rulers and religious authorities throughout history, yet remains actively used in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church today. This ancient text holds secrets that some have deemed too dangerous to be widely known. Secrets about the origins of biblical figures, the nature of divinity, and the history of humanity itself. The historic encounter, King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. One of the most captivating stories in both Western and Ethiopian biblical tradition revolves around the enigmatic encounter between King Solomon of Israel and the Queen of Sheba. This legendary meeting, shrouded in mystery and romance, takes on dramatically different dimensions when comparing Western biblical accounts with Ethiopia's ancient texts. In the Western Bible, the story appears in 1 Kings chapter 10 with remarkable brevity. It tells us that the Queen of Sheba, having heard of Solomon's great wisdom and prosperity, journeyed to Jerusalem with a caravan of camels bearing spices, gold, and precious stones. She came to test the king with difficult questions and riddles. Solomon answered all her questions, and she was overwhelmed by his wisdom, the palace he had built, and the food on his table. The queen exclaimed, "Not even half was told to me. Your wisdom and prosperity far exceed the report I heard." The account concludes with an exchange of gifts, the queen presenting Solomon with 120 talents of gold and a great quantity of spices, while Solomon gave the queen all she desired and asked for. The Western Bible then simply states that she turned and went to her own country, she and her servants. But this account leaves much unsaid. Who exactly was this mysterious queen? Where was Sheba located, and what happened after their encounter? The Kebra Nagast, the sacred text of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, fills these gaps with a far more detailed and provocative narrative that Western religious authorities have sought to suppress for centuries. According to the Kebra Nagast, which translates to the glory of kings, the Queen of Sheba, known in Ethiopia as Makeda, ruled over not a small Arabian territory as some Western scholars suggest, but the mighty Ethiopian Empire. The text describes her as a queen of extraordinary beauty, intelligence, and spiritual curiosity. When she heard of Solomon's fame, she was drawn not merely by reports of his wealth, but by his reputation as a vessel of divine wisdom and knowledge. What the Kebra Nagast reveals, and what Western biblical accounts conspicuously omit, is that during the queen's visit to Jerusalem, she and King Solomon developed an intimate relationship. According to Ethiopian tradition, before the queen departed Jerusalem, Solomon deliberately tricked her into breaking a vow of abstinence she had made. He served her spicy food, placed a water pitcher near her bed, and extracted a promise that she would take nothing from his house without permission. Awakening thirsty in the night and reaching for water, she broke her vow, at which point Solomon appeared and claimed his right to her as a king. From this union, Ethiopian tradition holds that a son was born, Menelik first, meaning son of the wise man. When Menelik grew to manhood, he journeyed to Jerusalem to meet his father. Solomon recognized him immediately, seeing his own face reflected in his son's. The king attempted to persuade Menelik to remain in Jerusalem and eventually succeed him, but Menelik chose to return to Ethiopia. Before his departure, Solomon anointed him as a king and gave him the firstborn sons of the Israeli nobles to serve as his royal court in Ethiopia. This is where the Kebra Nagast tells an even more controversial story, one that explains why it was considered dangerous by Western religious authorities. According to the text, Menelik and his companions secretly took the Ark of the Covenant from the temple in Jerusalem and brought it to Ethiopia. This divine artifact, containing the original tablets of the Ten Commandments given to Moses, was the most sacred object in Judaism and meant to remain in Jerusalem's temple. Yet Ethiopian tradition insists that the true Ark has resided in Ethiopia ever since, currently housed in a chapel in Aksum, guarded by a single monk who is appointed keeper for life and never allowed to leave the chapel grounds. For Ethiopians, this narrative isn't merely a story but the foundation of their national and religious identity. The Solomonic dynasty, which ruled Ethiopia for over 700 years until the deposition of Emperor Haile Selassie in 1974, claimed direct descent from this union of Solomon and Sheba through their son Menelik I. This lineage established Ethiopia as a new Jerusalem, and its people as inheritors of Israel's covenant with God, a claim that directly challenged European notions of religious authority and divine favor. What makes this narrative even more compelling is that modern science has begun to provide evidence that might support elements of this ancient tradition. In 2012, genetic researchers studying Ethiopian populations found evidence of significant genetic admixture with Middle Eastern populations dating back approximately 3,000 years. Precisely the historical period when Solomon and Sheba would have lived. This genetic research revealed that up to 40% of Ethiopian DNA shows links to ancient Semitic populations from the area that includes modern Israel and Yemen. Archaeological discoveries have also lent credence to aspects of the Ethiopian narrative. Excavations at sites in northern Ethiopia have uncovered artifacts with distinctly Israelite characteristics dating to the appropriate historical period. Ancient stone inscriptions have been found with references to a queen of the south who journeyed. The ancient port of Adulis on the Red Sea coast shows evidence of extensive trade with Jerusalem and other Middle Eastern kingdoms during Solomon's era, making such a royal visit logistically plausible. Perhaps most intriguingly, traditional Ethiopian architecture, particularly in ancient churches and royal buildings, displays unmistakable stylistic similarities to descriptions of Solomonic architecture in the Bible. The layout of certain ancient Ethiopian temples mirrors the biblical descriptions of Solomon's temple to a remarkable degree, details that would be difficult to fabricate without first-hand knowledge. While Western scholars have often dismissed the Ethiopian narrative as legend, this convergence of genetic science, archaeology, and architectural evidence has forced a reconsideration of these ancient claims. What if the Ethiopian tradition contains historical truths that have been systematically excluded from Western religious narratives? What other crucial pieces of our shared human history might we be missing because they were preserved only in traditions deemed heretical or threatening to established power structures? The story of Solomon and Sheba transcends a mere historical curiosity. It strikes at the heart of religious authority, cultural identity, and how history itself is written and preserved. For Ethiopians, this narrative isn't a distant myth, but a living tradition that has shaped their national consciousness for millennia and provides context for their unique form of Christianity and its most sacred text, the Ethiopian Bible. The Ethiopian Bible, a hidden cultural treasure. The Ethiopian Bible stands as one of humanity's most remarkable yet underappreciated cultural treasures. Unlike the familiar King James Bible with its 66 books, the Ethiopic Bible comprises a staggering 88 books, making it the largest and most comprehensive biblical canon in the Christian world. This expansive collection includes all the books found in Western Bibles, plus an additional 22 texts considered non-canonical or apocryphal by Roman Catholic and Protestant traditions. This striking difference raises profound questions. Why does this ancient African nation preserve a more extensive biblical canon than Western Christianity? And why have these additional texts been systematically excluded from Western biblical traditions? At first glance, the Ethiopian Bible captivates with its physical magnificence. Unlike mass-produced modern editions, traditional Ethiopian sacred texts are handcrafted artistic masterpieces. The oldest surviving Ethiopian biblical manuscripts date back over 1,500 years, written on carefully prepared parchment made from goatskin that undergoes an elaborate preparation process lasting several weeks. Scribes use natural inks derived from plants, minerals, and sometimes even gold for important passages. Each copy represents years of meticulous labor, with vibrant illuminations depicting biblical scenes rendered in distinctly Ethiopian artistic styles. The most distinctive feature of these manuscripts is their language, Ge'ez, an ancient Semitic language that has been used exclusively for liturgical purposes in Ethiopia for over a millennium. Ge'ez is no longer spoken in daily life, but continues to be used in Ethiopian Orthodox worship services, creating a direct linguistic connection to early Christianity that few other traditions can claim. The earliest evidence of Christianity in Ethiopia dates to the 4th century, when King Ezana of Aksum converted to Christianity. But the translation of biblical texts into Ge'ez was a gradual process that continued for centuries. The Ethiopian Bible is typically divided into two main collections. The larger book, known as the Synodos, contains the Old Testament, and the smaller book called the Mashafa Berhan contains the New Testament. However, what makes this Bible truly exceptional are the additional texts not found in Western biblical canons. These include books like Enoch, Jubilees, and the Ascension of Isaiah, ancient Jewish and early Christian writings that provide crucial context for understanding biblical worldviews, but were excluded from Western canons for various theological and political reasons. The Book of Enoch deserves special attention. This ancient Jewish apocalyptic text, attributed to Enoch, the great-grandfather of Noah, was widely read and referenced by early Christians, including the authors of the New Testament. The Epistle of Jude directly quotes from Enoch, yet Western biblical canons entirely excluded this important work. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church stands alone among major Christian denominations in preserving Enoch as canonical scripture. The book contains detailed accounts of fallen angels, the Nephilim, giants, prophecies about the coming Messiah, and cosmological revelations that profoundly influenced early Christian thought. What makes this exclusion particularly striking is that scholars now recognize Enoch's crucial importance for understanding the worldview of Jesus and his earliest followers. References to concepts found in Enoch appear throughout the New Testament, but without access to this text, Western Christians have been missing vital context for nearly 2 millennia. Only with the discovery of Dead Sea Scroll fragments of Enoch in 1947 did Western scholars begin to appreciate what Ethiopian Christians had preserved all along. The Book of Jubilees, another text preserved only in Ethiopia until recent centuries, provides an alternative chronology of events from creation to Moses, emphasizing different aspects of Jewish law and tradition. It bridges gaps in biblical narratives and offers explanations for questions left unanswered in Genesis and Exodus. Similarly, texts like the Ascension of Isaiah and the Apocalypse of Ezra provide crucial insights into early Christian and Jewish apocalyptic thought that shaped the religious imagination of the biblical world. These lost texts reveal perspectives on familiar biblical stories that challenge conventional Western interpretations. For instance, in the Ethiopian tradition, the fall of Adam and Eve is understood not merely as disobedience, but as humanity's premature attempt to claim divine wisdom before being properly prepared. A nuanced view that differs significantly from Western Christianity's emphasis on original sin. Similarly, Ethiopian texts offer more detailed accounts of figures like Melchizedek, Enoch, and even Pontius Pilate, providing richer context for biblical narratives. What makes the Ethiopian preservation of these texts even more remarkable is the elaborate ritual traditions surrounding them. During the Timkat festival, Ethiopian Epiphany, copies of sacred texts are wrapped in ornate cloths and paraded through streets on the heads of priests, accompanied by drums, sistrum rattles, prayer sticks, and processional crosses. Thousands gather in white traditional garments, creating scenes that have remained largely unchanged for centuries. The most sacred texts are kept in special tablet houses within church compounds, where they are guarded by designated keepers and only displayed on specific holy days. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church preserves not just the texts themselves, but an entire ecosystem of interpretation, ritual, and living tradition. Ethiopian biblical exegesis includes unique systems of interpretation that have developed independently from Western theological traditions. For instance, the Ethiopian tradition of Andemta commentary provides multiple layers of meaning for biblical passages: literal, allegorical, moral, and anagogical, each carefully preserved through oral teaching traditions. Perhaps most fascinating is how these sacred texts inform Ethiopian art, architecture, and daily life. Church walls throughout Ethiopia feature vibrant murals depicting scenes from books like Enoch and Jubilees alongside familiar biblical narratives. Traditional Ethiopian homes often contain symbolic elements reflecting stories found only in their expanded biblical canon. Ethiopian crosses incorporate design elements referencing cosmological concepts from Enoch, creating physical manifestations of textual traditions unknown to most Western Christians. For centuries, European missionaries and scholars who encountered the Ethiopian Bible dismissed it as unorthodox or heretical without seriously engaging with its contents. This dismissal reflects not theological rigor, but cultural imperialism. The assumption that European Christian traditions represented the correct version of Christianity, while African expressions were automatically suspect. This attitude prevented Western Christianity from benefiting from the profound insights preserved in these ancient texts, and contributed to a distorted understanding of early Christianity as primarily a European religious tradition. The Ethiopian Bible challenges not just religious orthodoxy, but our understanding of history itself. It preserves knowledge that contradicts dominant narratives about the development of Christianity and raises profound questions about who has the authority to determine which texts are considered sacred. In an era of increasing recognition of African contributions to world civilization, the Ethiopian Bible stands as a testament to Africa's central role in preserving some of humanity's most ancient spiritual wisdom. Wisdom that others sought to suppress or destroy, but which Ethiopia protected through centuries of tumultuous history. The survival of the Ethiopian biblical tradition represents one of history's greatest acts of cultural preservation, a determination to maintain spiritual inheritance against tremendous odds. As we'll discover, this preservation came at great cost, as various powers throughout history have attempted to suppress these texts and replace them with versions more aligned with European theological and political interests. The conspiracy of silence: why the Ethiopian Bible was banned. Throughout history, powerful institutions have sought to control not just territories and resources, but knowledge itself. The Ethiopian Bible stands as a profound example of how sacred texts that challenge dominant narratives can become targets for suppression. The banning of the Ethiopian Bible was not a single event, but a sustained campaign spanning centuries, driven by theological differences, colonial ambitions, and the desire to control religious authority. The story begins with doctrinal differences that emerged as Christianity developed different branches. While the Ethiopian Orthodox Church preserved an expansive biblical canon that included books like Enoch, Jubilees, and the Ascension of Isaiah, Western Christian authorities increasingly narrowed their canon. The Council of Laodicea in 363 AD, and later the Council of Rome in 382 AD, began restricting which texts could be considered canonical, excluding many works still revered in Ethiopia. These decisions weren't purely theological, but often reflected political considerations, as Christianity became increasingly intertwined with Roman imperial power. By the 5th century, Western Church authorities had largely settled on a more limited biblical canon, declaring the additional Ethiopian texts apocryphal, or even heretical. When European Christians later encountered Ethiopian Christianity, they viewed these differences not as alternative traditions, but as dangerous deviations. The additional books in the Ethiopian Bible contained theological perspectives that sometimes contradicted doctrines that had become central to Western Christianity, particularly regarding the nature of angels, the cosmos, and divine judgment. For instance, the Book of Enoch's detailed descriptions of fallen angels and their interactions with humans offered a more complex view of supernatural beings than Western theological traditions were comfortable acknowledging. Similarly, Jubilees presented alternative accounts of familiar biblical stories that sometimes contradicted Western interpretations. These texts didn't just offer additional stories, they presented fundamentally different frameworks for understanding humanity's relationship with the divine, challenging the theological authority Western churches had worked for centuries to establish. The suppression intensified dramatically during the Age of Exploration and subsequent colonial period. As European powers expanded their global reach, they often used religious conversion as a tool for extending political control. When Portuguese missionaries first established significant contact with Ethiopia in the 16th century, they were shocked to discover an ancient Christian tradition that predated their own conversion to Christianity and operated entirely independently from Rome. Rather than approaching this tradition with respect, the Portuguese missionaries, particularly the Jesuits, launched aggressive efforts to bring the Ethiopian Church under papal authority. In 1622, Emperor Susenyos converted to Catholicism under Jesuit influence and attempted to force his subjects to abandon traditional Ethiopian practices. This included efforts to replace Ethiopian biblical texts with Roman Catholic versions and burn books considered heretical. The resulting civil war led to thousands of deaths before Susenyos' son, Emperor Fasilides, expelled the Jesuits in 1633 and restored traditional Ethiopian Orthodox practices. This pattern repeated during the colonial era, as European missionaries viewed the Ethiopian Bible with suspicion and worked to suppress its use among Ethiopian Christians. They dismissed the inclusion of apocryphal texts as evidence of heresy and sought to impose their own versions of the Bible on the Ethiopian Christian community. These efforts were part of a broader colonial project to replace indigenous cultural and religious practices with European ones, undermining the autonomy and identity of colonized peoples. What makes this suppression particularly striking is that the Ethiopian biblical tradition likely preserves elements of early Christianity that were lost in Western traditions. The biblical scholar R.H. Charles, who translated many Ethiopian texts in the early 20th century, concluded that Ethiopian manuscripts often contained older and more accurate versions of certain biblical passages than those preserved in Western traditions. This suggests that rather than being corrupt or heretical, Ethiopian texts might actually preserve authentic early Christian teachings that were later altered or suppressed in Western Christianity. The Italian invasion and occupation of Ethiopia from 1935 to 1941 marked perhaps the most aggressive period of suppression. Under Mussolini's fascist regime, Italian authorities seized ancient manuscripts, destroyed churches, and executed Ethiopian Orthodox clergy who resisted. The Italians recognized that Ethiopia's unique religious traditions were inseparable from its national identity and targeted them specifically to break Ethiopian resistance. Manuscripts dating back over 1,000 years were looted from monasteries and either destroyed or shipped to European collections, where many remain today, despite Ethiopian requests for their return. Yet throughout these periods of persecution, a remarkable underground network worked to preserve Ethiopia's sacred texts. Known as the Keepers of the Ark, these dedicated individuals, often monks, deacons, and scribes, risked their lives to hide manuscripts in caves, remote monasteries, and even burial grounds. Using secret codes and signals, they maintained a clandestine network spanning the Ethiopian highlands, alerting each other to threats and moving precious texts to safety before invaders could seize them. One extraordinary account from the Italian occupation tells of Abba Gebre Menfeskidis, an elderly monk who, upon learning of approaching Italian forces, organized the evacuation of over 200 ancient manuscripts from his monastery. He and his fellow monks traveled for weeks through treacherous mountain terrain, carrying these irreplaceable texts wrapped in waterproof sheepskins. They established a hidden repository inside a nearly inaccessible cave system where the manuscripts remained safely concealed until the Italian occupation ended. Similar stories played out across Ethiopia, with ordinary believers sometimes memorizing entire books to preserve them when physical copies were in danger of destruction. This commitment to preservation wasn't limited to clergy. Ethiopian communities developed ingenious methods for hiding texts in plain sight, including specially designed household items with secret compartments, encoded musical notations that preserve biblical passages in song, and oral transmission systems that ensured sacred knowledge would survive even if all written copies were destroyed. These preservation efforts represent one of history's most remarkable examples of cultural resistance against overwhelming odds. The suppression of the Ethiopian Bible was not just about theology, but about power. Specifically, who had the authority to define Christianity and interpret its sacred texts? By declaring Ethiopian texts heretical or apocryphal, Western authorities positioned themselves as the arbiters of religious truth, dismissing one of the world's oldest Christian traditions as misguided or corrupt. This dismissal reflected a broader pattern of European powers, minimizing or erasing African contributions to world civilization and religious thought. Despite centuries of attempts to suppress it, the Ethiopian biblical tradition survived, preserved through the courage and dedication of countless individuals who recognized the importance of maintaining their spiritual heritage. Today, as we re-examine historical narratives with greater awareness of colonial influences, the Ethiopian Bible stands as a powerful reminder of how dominant cultures have attempted to silence alternative perspectives and how marginalized communities have resisted such erasure. The conspiracy to silence the Ethiopian Bible wasn't a conspiracy in the sense of secret meetings and shadowy plots, but something perhaps more insidious: a systemic dismissal of African religious tradition as inherently less valid than European interpretations, backed by the coercive power of colonial and religious institutions. This dismissal has impoverished our collective understanding not just of Christianity, but of the diverse ways humans have understood their relationship with the divine throughout history. Revelation and Legacy: the Ethiopian Bible today. In recent decades, the Ethiopian Bible has experienced a remarkable renaissance in global scholarship and religious studies. What was once dismissed as heretical or primitive is now recognized as an invaluable window into early Christianity and ancient Jewish thought. This shift represents a profound reversal of centuries of academic marginalization and opens exciting new frontiers in our understanding of religious history. The discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls in 1947 marked a turning point in Western scholarly attitudes toward Ethiopian biblical traditions. When fragments of texts like Enoch and Jubilees emerged from the Qumran caves in languages predating the Ethiopian versions, scholars could no longer dismiss these works as late Ethiopian fabrications. Instead, they were forced to acknowledge that Ethiopia had faithfully preserved ancient texts that had been lost to Western traditions for nearly 2 millennia. Harvard University professor James Vanderkam, after decades studying Jubilees, concluded that the Ethiopian Orthodox Church deserves immense credit for preserving these invaluable works when they were lost to the rest of the world. Today, the Ethiopian Bible plays a vital role in the daily spiritual life of millions. For Ethiopian Orthodox Christians, these sacred texts aren't academic curiosities, but living guideposts for faith and practice. In churches throughout Ethiopia and in diaspora communities worldwide, liturgies incorporate readings from books like Enoch and Jubilees alongside familiar biblical passages. During major festivals like Timkat, Epiphany, and Meskel, Finding of the True Cross, ancient manuscripts are displayed in elaborate processions that draw millions of participants, creating living connections to traditions that stretch back nearly 2 millennia. The preservation of these texts has taken on new urgency in the digital age. The Ethiopian Heritage Project, a collaboration between Ethiopian religious authorities and international scholars, has begun the painstaking work of digitizing ancient manuscripts to protect them from deterioration, conflict, and climate change. Using advanced imaging technologies, researchers have uncovered previously illegible passages and discovered marginalia that provides insights into how these texts were understood throughout different historical periods. These digital archives are making Ethiopian biblical traditions accessible to a global audience for the first time, allowing for comparative studies that were impossible just decades ago. Perhaps most surprising are the connections emerging between Ethiopian biblical texts and other ancient traditions. Recent scholarship has revealed striking parallels between cosmological concepts in the Ethiopian Book of Enoch and certain Egyptian astronomical texts, suggesting cultural exchanges that predate even the Aksumite kingdom. Similarly, linguistic analysis has identified connections between passages in Ethiopian apocryphal works and fragments of ancient Mesopotamian literature, pointing to shared cultural origins that challenge conventional understandings of how religious ideas developed and spread in the ancient world. These discoveries suggest that the Ethiopian Bible may preserve not just early Jewish and Christian traditions, but elements of even older spiritual wisdom that influence the development of monotheistic religions. As Harvard scholar David Frankfurter noted, Ethiopia may have preserved strands of ancient Near Eastern thought that were systematically edited out of Western religious traditions, giving us a more complete picture of the religious environment that gave birth to Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. The story of the Ethiopian Bible transcends religious boundaries to touch on fundamental questions about cultural heritage, intellectual freedom, and the politics of knowledge. Who decides which texts are worthy of preservation? Whose interpretations of sacred traditions are deemed authoritative? How does the suppression of alternative perspectives impoverish our collective understanding of human spiritual heritage? These questions remain urgently relevant in an era when cultural erasure continues to threaten indigenous knowledge systems worldwide. As we confront ongoing challenges of cultural imperialism and religious intolerance, the Ethiopian Bible stands as a powerful reminder of the resilience of marginalized traditions and the importance of preserving diverse perspectives. It challenges us to question dominant historical narratives and to recognize that truth often survives at the margins, preserved by those with the courage to maintain their heritage against overwhelming pressure to conform. The journey of discovery continues. Each year, researchers identify previously unknown manuscripts in remote Ethiopian monasteries and churches, adding new pieces to this ancient puzzle. What other treasures might still await discovery? What ancient wisdom might emerge from texts that have remained unread for centuries? The Ethiopian Bible invites us to approach history with humility, recognizing how much has been lost and how much remains to be rediscovered. We invite you to join this journey of exploration and reclamation. By sharing this knowledge, supporting efforts to preserve endangered manuscripts, and challenging narratives that marginalize non-Western traditions, you become part of a movement to restore what has been suppressed and celebrate the full diversity of human spiritual heritage. The truth cannot remain forbidden forever. And through your engagement, these ancient voices can speak once more to a world that desperately needs their wisdom. The story of the Ethiopian Bible serves as a powerful reminder that history is rarely what we've been taught. For those of us who have lived 4 decades or more, we've witnessed how narratives shift, how facts we once accepted as absolute truth have been revealed as merely one perspective among many. Just as this ancient African nation preserved sacred texts that others sought to erase, we too carry wisdom that deserves to be honored and shared. In our rapidly changing world, where younger generations are constantly rewriting the rules, there is profound value in the knowledge we've accumulated through our lived experiences. Like the Ethiopian keepers of sacred manuscripts, who risked everything to preserve their heritage, we each have a responsibility to safeguard the wisdom we've gained through our years of triumph and struggle. The cultural erasure that threatened Ethiopia's spiritual traditions mirrors challenges many of us face as we age, feeling increasingly invisible or dismissed in a youth-obsessed culture. Yet just as Ethiopia's persistence ultimately vindicated their traditions, our continued engagement with the world around us ensures that hard-won wisdom isn't lost. What truths are you preserving that might otherwise be forgotten? What experiences have shaped your understanding in ways that younger generations might benefit from hearing? The Ethiopian Bible survived centuries of suppression because ordinary people recognized its value and refused to let it disappear. Your stories, insights, and perspectives matter just as much. In sharing them, whether with family, community, or the wider world, you become part of humanity's unbroken chain of wisdom transmission. Remember, what appears forgotten or forbidden in one era often becomes the essential truth of the next. Your voice matters more than you know. If this journey through Ethiopia's forbidden biblical history has sparked your curiosity, we invite you to join our community of truth seekers. Share your thoughts and questions in the comments below. What surprised you most about the Ethiopian Bible? What other hidden histories would you like us to explore? Your perspective enriches this ongoing conversation. Support our mission to uncover suppressed knowledge by subscribing to our channel for weekly revelations about forgotten histories and alternative perspectives. Every like helps our content reach more viewers searching for deeper truths. Please share this video with friends and family who appreciate challenging conventional narratives. Together, we're building a movement dedicated to preserving and honoring diverse cultural knowledge that powerful institutions have attempted to erase throughout history. The truth cannot remain hidden when we stand united in our quest for understanding.